the mouthpiece puzzle that we all go through as saxophonists sometimes can be a bit daunting.
Welcome, Herschel McWilliams.
Hey, man. Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Herschel's a good friend of mine. He's the founder of LiveJazzKC.com, and he's a composer, a teacher, educator, and a saxophone player in the Kansas City area. And my name's Scott Reed. I'm a wooden repair technician as well as a saxophone player. And I'm so glad you're here.
Man, I'm glad to be here because you bailed me out with my soprano today because it had gotten kicked over and you made it work again fast. So, Scott Reed, guys, KC Horns, the best in Kansas City. There's a lot of good ones.
Yeah, there's a lot.
But there's only one great one, and he's right here.
All right. I'll pay you for that later.
So you wanted to have a little chat about mouthpieces. And this is something I've sort of geeked about for a long time and sort of to my own demise in some circumstances become overly aware of. But I hope today we can answer some questions for some people out there that maybe are on the same path or having the same kind of issues. What I was thinking about as we were talking about this was, the mouthpiece puzzle that we all go through as saxophonists sometimes can be a bit daunting. I think back to, as a young player, kind of the, first thing you try to do is make yourself sound as good as possible. And of course, it's easy to think as a high school kid that the guy with the nice shiny new saxophone that sounds so good is because he's got this nice shiny new saxophone. But come to find out, in that time that from talking to some of my other saxophone players in school, that really they had all just changed their mouthpieces. Now, in high school, we all pretty much played the standard Selmer S80 C-Star mouthpiece here, if you can see it, but just your everyday Selmer concert band C-Star mouthpiece. And at that time, I was playing it in the jazz band because that was the only mouthpiece that I had. Now, I wanted to have a little more of a versatile mouthpiece for jazz band, pep band, marching band stuff. So I remember going to the music store and asking the guy there, what's a good jazz mouthpiece? And of course, at the time, there was really only one option to buy off the shelf. There were really two. You could buy an Auto-Link or you could buy a Meyer for alto. A Meyer alto sax mouthpiece off the shelf in the early 90s looked just about like this. Came in a white box just like this, and they said, here you go, here's a Meyer 5. This is what you need to play jazz in the jazz band. And for all intents and purposes, they were not wrong. And that's, to this day, sort of the standard. But let's talk about why there's a difference in some of these things. And how you can see the assortment of mouthpieces we have laid out here. They range from soprano or alto, tenor, bari, from very old mouthpieces from the 20s and 30s, like this maybe old Busher or Martin mouthpiece, to a much more modern Theo Wani Durga alto slim mouthpiece, which has a pretty aggressive baffle and window, and we'll talk a little bit about those things as well. Now, really, there's three things with mouthpieces that I feel like give it its characteristics of sound as a player. Right now, naturally, we all have different embouchures, different air stream support, which all factors into what we can play for a setup. But just homogenizing those things, in general, we look at three major parts of the mouthpiece that are going to affect how we make a sound and what it sounds like to us on the back side of it. And those three things are, and we'll get in more detail about it, the tip opening and the chamber size, I believe, as well as the facing curve, and the facing curve of the tip as well. Let's talk about tip opening. So I mentioned this was a Meyer 5. This is like your middle of the road, not too open, not too closed, tip opening. Whereas compared to a C-Star, this would be, if the C-Star is what we're used to playing, this would be about an E or an F maybe in the Selmer terms. Larger tip opening, which is going to require two things from a player. One is maybe a little more air, is maybe a slightly softer reed to really fit within the sound of the big band or the jazz groups that we're playing in. But tip opening is going to allow us to put more air, more sound, more volume, a bigger sound, which is going to require a little bit more mature approach with air support as well in the horn. Next is chamber size, and I'll refer to this Meyer. This has what Meyer refers to as a medium chamber. And if you look inside, it's just a round chamber, and you can see the sidewalls kind of coming in. But it's a rounded chamber inside the mouthpiece. The chamber is the area where you blow in the reed, and comes up, the mouthpiece comes up here, and the chamber is where the air goes into. And the smaller the chamber versus the larger chamber, this has a medium chamber, so if it was a large chamber, it would be a little inherently darker sound. Not necessarily quieter, but a little on the darker side, if that makes sense. Whereas a smaller chambered mouthpiece sometimes are a little brighter, a little more focused, and a little more cutting, depending on the player. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do have some thoughts and I have some questions. If I was a high school student just getting really into saxophone, I wanted to get something a little better for jazz, do you think like a Meyer 5 would be an appropriate choice, or do you think something with a bigger tip opening, like a Meyer 6 or a Meyer 7, how would...
Well, that's a great question. And my advice would be to play a few, right?
Okay.
And back when we were in high school, or even to not too long ago, we could get on woodwindandbrasswind.com and order 4 or 5 mouthpieces with our credit cards, and they'd ship them to us so we could play them all, and then we could send back the ones we don't want and try them out, see if we like them, send them back. And, you know, which was great because I got an opportunity sometimes to order 3 or 4 Meyer 5s and 6s and pick the best one out of the bunch, you know. Or I might decide that I get a 5, 6, and a 7, and I don't want to go any stiffer than the reed I'm playing now, but I need something a little more open, so I'm just going to mess around with those in terms of maybe finding a large chamber or a medium chamber and experimenting with them. But as, like you said, as a high school student, I would say a 5 would be a good place to start. If you have the opportunity to go somewhere and play a 5 and a 6 next to one another, I play a 6 tip opening on my alto mouthpiece because it's what fits me. On tenor, I play more of an 8, right? But on alto, the 6 feels right. And if you have the chance to compare them side by side and go back and forth, you can really narrow it down. But I think in general, a Meyer mouthpiece like this would be a really good place to start. And also there are some alternatives to Meyers that I might recommend from a quality control standpoint. Some might say are a little better. Diodario makes a really nice Jazz Select mouthpiece for alto saxophone. That would be another wonderful choice. Van Doren V16 hard rubber mouthpiece is another very affordable, comparable choice. And they have some chamber size differences. They have the small, medium chambers that you can get from 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tip openings in those all the way up. And like if you're going to go like to an A7 medium, that would be, or A5 medium, that would be a similar, you know, to this Meyer. But the quality controls on those are excellent, and they're really highly crafted mouthpieces for the price point that they're in, you know, in that $100 to $150 range. And some of these are going to sound really expensive, and to me $100 is still very expensive. It's a lot of money, but if you make an investment into a mouthpiece like that, it's the easiest thing you can do to really change your sound as opposed to buying a new horn, right? I could play any of the student horns you have around here with my mouthpiece and sound relatively close to the same as I'd sound on any other horn with my setup. Now, if I play my horn with any old mouthpiece, I'm going to sound remarkably different, in my opinion at least. You know, probably still sound somewhat like me, but it's not going to feel the same. It's not going to be as responsive as I'd like it to be, and that's where some differences come into play. But along these Meyer lines, you know, there are some other options. Like I said, the Van Doren, the Diodario. You can also get into some of the Brillharts, some of the older Brillharts you'll find. But for the money, I think if you're starting out in this range here of the Meyers, Van Dorens, or the Diodarios, you're going to find some really good success and some immediate gratification in what you're doing.
Yeah, you hear a lot of professionals playing on a Diodario that sound excellent. Then you see professionals playing on like a Brillhart that could cost $500 or $600, and they sound really good. So it's kind of, I think it's probably just some fine lines between a $100 mouthpiece and a $500 or $600 collectible mouthpiece like this.
Yeah, well, this is just for reference. This is a Brillhart Great Neck Period tonal end tenor mouthpiece, probably from the 40s or 50s.
Yeah, probably.
So there's some collectible value there. Does it sound as good as any mouthpiece? Potentially, yes. Does it sound as good as any for me? No, maybe not for me, but for somebody would really like this. And it has some characteristics that are true to the Brillhart style of mouthpiece, right? There's some players that only play these. And at the end of the day, you know, saxophonists, we fall into the trap of wanting to try it all, right? I mean, look around you here. You've got 40 saxophones within my view, and
these are just stuff we just dug out of the drawers. And
these are the first 30 mouthpieces we could find, or something like that.
And there's some nostalgia to playing something like this too.
Oh
and
yeah,
like you'll pay $300 for this mouthpiece, and then get sent it off and have a band put on it because they tend to crack, and then have the work on.
Right.
And you have $500 or $600 in them, and they're awesome, but a lot of it is the collectability.
You know, then you get into some of the other, you know, a lot of young jazz people see metal mouthpieces and assume they have to have a metal mouthpiece to play jazz. When in fact, a large number of the jazz saxophonists I know do not play metal mouthpieces. I mean, probably more don't than actually do that I interact with on a regular basis. Now, there are plenty that do, and they sound great, and I have played them a long time myself. But no, the answer is you do not have to. There's nothing that sounds any different from this auto link into a hard rubber auto link. If it's played by the right guy, it's not going to sound a whole lot different. It's ultimately the chambers are going to be designed similarly. The facing curve here is going to be what matters in the tip opening, right? So if we're putting air through the horn, getting a good seal, have a nice tip opening with a good curve so it allows the reed to vibrate in a free fashion, you're going to get a quality sound out of the mouthpiece.
So this is a plastic height mouthpiece, and I think these play pretty well. But let's say I'm wanting to upgrade. Do you think it'd be easier if I jumped to something with this big baffle, trying to get a better sound, or would I struggle then compared to something with a medium?
So let's talk about that for a second.
Baffle.
A baffle is the material on the inside here. There's material on the inside of the mouthpiece, and sometimes it's raised up from the beak. It'll be raised up taller. In this particular Theowani has a raised baffle that kind of steps down. It's flat and steps down into the chamber. The thing about a baffled mouthpiece, and this has it, this Berg Larsen has a very pronounced bullet baffle in here as well. Characteristic of the horns, I believe this Lakey's going to have a long raised baffle. And what a baffle does from a physics standpoint, if this makes sense, and it allows the reed to vibrate faster, quicker, because there's less resistance of air going through, and it's bouncing right back on the reed, and you get some immediate feedback, and inherently it buzzes faster, sometimes brighter. Some people might say they're brighter because there's a faster buzz. It's a little bit more pronounced brightness in the tone itself. But to answer your question, I wouldn't recommend a student moving to one of these right away without a fairly advanced approach to the horn and embouchure, right? A developed embouchure that's going to be able to handle, because something like this is going to require more control from an embouchure standpoint, because there's intonation things that happen when you have a mouthpiece. All of a sudden you're working more to keep the mouthpiece in tune, to keep the horn in tune. I think your son even found that out with this particular mouthpiece.
Yeah.
You know, it's a monster and it sounds great, but it's a little bit of work to learn to control it. And that's just muscle memory. Whereas like the baffle in a Meyer is a really kind of low, slow rolling, evenly low baffle that's almost even with the beak angle here. It goes up but it rolls up real gently to the top, which offers a real even sound and some nice, not super resistant, but not so free that you can, you know, lose control fast, which can happen with some of the higher baffled mouthpieces. That's the tough part with some of these mouthpieces that are off the shelf and like sort of mass produces. You end up with a brand new mouthpiece doesn't play like you should because sometimes the tables aren't totally flat, or the facing curve, like we spoke about the facing curve and why it's so important. Now there's a measurement in the facing curve from the tip opening to where it breaks off from the mouthpiece, the break point, right? And the difference for the reed leaves the mouthpiece leaves the reed and goes up to the tip, that curve should be even and consistent and gradual from break point to tip.
Okay.
And if there's uneven on one rail to the other rail, if they're not evenly curved from both side to side, you have like an asymmetrical facing, which can cause some problems in playing. Like sometimes you'll see guys who play out of sides of their mouth. Well, inherently they'll end up wearing their mouthpieces down to an asymmetrical facing, kind of like our buddy Dave Valdez. He kind of plays out here. Well, he's got an asymmetrical facing that has worn into his mouthpiece over time.
Oh, wow.
So if you or I go to play it, we don't sound don't sound good at all because we play our horns right here. But out of the box, you'll find some that are asymmetrical. You'll have flat spots or uneven spots, or the tip rail here on the tip is uneven. Like you want a nice, even, thin tip rail. It'd be fatter on one side, and that's just the manufacturing standards that we have nowadays. This particular Meyer looks really nice. It's got a nice tip. It's got pretty even rails, and it looks like it would play really wonderfully. If you hear my jacket, I'll take it off for now. We'll take it off and see if that helps. I know it's gonna be quieter.
Another question I have is, we both like to play modified mouthpieces. Would you ever recommend taking something like a Meyer 5 and even if you think it plays really well, send it off, or have somebody, if you have somebody good locally, like we have Mark Farmer, just say, hey, check this mouthpiece out, make sure everything's even and level?
If it plays really well, it would be the least of my concerns, right? If there's something that I can notice, like, hey, this plays pretty good, except for in the high upper registers, I'm having some problems. Though that might be inherent of a facing curve issue, or a tip problem, or a flat or an uneven spot in the table. And I would have somebody local, like, or if you don't have anybody local that can work on mouthpieces, do it, have it checked out and measured. My particular alto mouthpiece was made from an unfinished mouthpiece blank that I bought, but essentially was turned into what Bryan Powell, the mouthpiece technician that finished it, thought of as more of a Autolink style, with a bigger chamber than a Meyer, larger chamber, and a little bit longer facing curve than a standard alto medium curve. A little bit longer for me works because there's a little less resistance, and tend to be a little more reed friendly, in my opinion. It's not the gospel, but a little more reed friendly for me. And I feel like I can still get really clear upper notes while not losing the ability to have a nice subtone down low.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because everyone's embouchure's a little different. So if you have somebody that plays really well and you're like, what kind of mouthpiece are you playing? Your embouchure and just how your mouth and your oral cavity, everything is, it's not going to be exactly like that person. So you might play that mouthpiece and go, well, that's a decent, but I don't see how that guy's sounding like that on that mouthpiece.
When I was 19, my dad got me one of these.
Yeah?
For Christmas, almost exactly like this. And I was so excited to get it because Joshua Redman played one that I thought was exactly the same, and I was going to sound like Joshua Redman now. And as it turns out, I didn't. And I played it and I fought with it for a long time, and I just realized that it's not for me. I have a tough time with the metal mouthpieces because they're narrower for my embouchure. That I almost prefer hard rubber just because of the way it fits in my mouth. Now, I still like the way it sounded. It just was very reed picky. And I had problems with the ligature, feeling like I could find a good ligature to hold the reed on. But at the end of the day, these are super popular. You know, this is sort of the gold standard, no pun intended, but of tenor mouthpieces that everybody plays or tries at least once point in their life. And, you know, all the greats have played them. So, and I wanted to be just like them and play it. And I tried it and it didn't work, but I played it for a long time until I realized it wasn't for me.
Yeah, I love that Autolink that I'm playing on. By the way, I have a great mouthpiece exercise video to show you how to work on your embouchure, and it's just a mouthpiece exercise video. I will link that below because that is a great way to improve your sound with your new mouthpiece or any mouthpiece that you're playing on.
Yeah. I do want to touch on some of this mouthpiece here that you had on your horn, you just took it off your alto. This Ted Klum Versatone Acoustimax. This is sort of like the Meyer in almost every way. If I took the ligature off this Meyer and held them side by side, you can see there's really very similar. The dimensions are similar, the lengths, the shape, everything. This is a completely hand-finished mouthpiece by Ted Klum. Very high-end production quality, and inherently a wonderful sounding, very consistent mouthpiece. You can get 6 of these and they'll all pretty much play the same. So if you're looking for a little higher end and you've got the budget, you know, these are probably $300 or a little bit more for this particular model, but one of the finest handmade mouthpieces on the market right now for alto saxophone, bar none. And he makes tenor mouthpieces as well as other horns, but I can speak to that one sounding great.
There were years decades where I thought there's no way a mouthpiece is worth $400 or $500, and then like you get hold of a Ted Klum and you think, actually maybe it is worth $500 or whatever that.
I wouldn't sell this for less than that.
Yeah.
I mean, my alto mouthpiece is so nice for me that you know how long I've played it.
Yeah.
It's been the only one.
Well, that Brillhart that I play on, and now I'm playing on the Autolink, which is the 40s Tone Master, which is worth a small fortune.
Yeah.
It's like, I should sell this, but it's worth, it plays so well that.
Yeah. And that was the thing about the Autolinks back in the 40s, 50s, 30s even. They were all handmade.
Okay. Yeah.
They were all handmade, hand-produced. Like, they weren't made in a factory and molded and just whacked on a machine and finished a little bit. They were meticulously made by a dude, you know? And some of those are still around with the original facings that are in really good shape. And, you know, even if they're not original facings, you'll still see people paying a bunch of money for them because the myth involved, right?
Mine was worked on, and it had worked on before I got it, and it just didn't play well, so I sent it to Erik, and he
made it play great.
Yeah, he's like, this thing's a piece of junk. I'm like, well, can you fix it? He's like, yeah, I can fix it. That's why I sent it.
That's what, I mean,
it's awesome now.
That's sort of the end point of all this is like, you can play anything as long as it sounds like what you want it to sound like in your head, right? And if you find a mouthpiece like a used Meyer and it plays really good, you can send it and have it cleaned up and refaced to make it play like an even more than perfect brand new Meyer. Yeah. And that's a great option. You know, it's a lot of work to get a mouthpiece that you're not sure 100% about, and when you get it back, it still may not be what you want. But at the end of the day, try a bunch. You know, try a handful. If you're just getting into it and you're starting on tenor or alto, you know, grab a Meyer, grab an Autolink, grab a Van Doren, grab a Diodario. They're affordable. Try them all out. If you go to a music store that has them, try them all out. Side by side. If your teacher may have some. If you're in Kansas City, you know, there's places around town that carry them. I know Dr. Note has a bunch of those things in stock. Some other places, but you'll do yourself a favor just by spending some time trying some things and finding what fits you, because ultimately this is such a personal matter that no advice I give is going to be super valuable to anybody who doesn't approach the saxophone the way that I maybe think they should for that mouthpiece. Yeah. You know?
And when someone tells you eventually you're going to have a shoebox full of mouthpieces and you think, there's no way, and then someday you have...
You don't have a shoebox, you have an entire desk.
Okay, I have more than a shoebox. I have a problem.
And you have a file cabinet.
Well, let's not mention the file cabinets. And I'm down to, well, I have 3 mouthpieces I really like on tenor sax, and one is a stock Van Doren V16 metal, the large chamber.
There you go.
And it's awesome, and it's just out of the box. It's a little expensive,
They're extremely high quality mouthpieces.
But it's an incredible mouthpiece. Yeah. And then I have the Autolink that's worth way too much money, and then the Brillhart, which also is worth some money, but I just love them, and I love the nostalgic and the historic factors, and then also they play well.
They play well, and that, I mean, my main tenor mouthpiece, I wouldn't even be able to tell you what brand it was because it's really not even a brand. Yeah. I just found one that looked good, that had the inside geometry that I liked, and I had it open to a tip opening I like, and man, it plays great. Yeah. but I couldn't tell you what brand it was if you held a gun to my head.
And this is the one that you gave me. That's the Bryan Powell.
Yeah, this is the little stepbrother to the mouthpiece I play. He made both of these at one time. This is a medium chamber and a large chamber. This is a killer playing mouthpiece, a really killer playing mouthpiece, just slightly smaller chamber to the one I play on a daily basis. Bryan Powell, mouthpieceguys.com. He's with Erik Greiffenhagen, and those guys do some amazing work. Have worked for the Ralph Morgan company for a long time, have their own line of mouthpieces. Yeah. And they know what they're doing. So plug to Bryan, those guys. With maybe one exception, the only guy that I ever used.
Yeah, you tend to send your stuff to Bryan. I tend to send my stuff to Erik.
Yeah.
And they're both awesome, but it's just...
Yeah,
I think David Valdez was like, you need to try to Erik, and so I sent to Erik, and I was like, okay, this is pretty awesome. So I just...
They're one of the
And then, of course, I play Bryan's, and then you've had some work done by Mark Farmer that he's done some really good work for you, too. He's local to KC.
He did my tenor mouthpiece.
Yeah, and that's a big deal to have someone local.
Yeah.
There's a few that I need to get to him and have him.
He did my tenor mouthpiece, and I'm super happy with it. So
yeah, I'll put Mark's link in the
do it, yeah. And long story short, this can all become brain damage, but don't let it become brain damage. Just go try a few things, find something you like, and find something you like, take all the rest of them and put them away. Take them somewhere else, give them to your friends, whatever. Sell them, get rid of them, so that you don't have them to fall back on, because you always find yourself wondering, what could have been?
Yeah, you find one that works well, and then you have to, it may take you $800 worth of reeds to find the reed that works even better with it. Then for me anyways, I'm always like, oh, what's this reed? I need to buy these box reeds and see if it's any better than the...
No, I use one kind of reed.
Okay, you're different than me.
I only use one kind of reed, and if I'm not going to change my reed for my mouthpiece. And it's because I'm really happy with the reeds, and I no paid sponsorship here, but I use the Van Doren Red Box Javas, and I have tried the Boston Sax Shop reeds on soprano, and I really like what I'm getting on that, but pretty much all the Red Box Javas for me.
One thing I like to do with mouthpieces is I will tend to buy the same tip opening. That way most of the reeds, I don't have to worry about changing reed sizes.
Yeah. Well, that's what and I think in theory that would work well, except for when you run into mouthpieces made with different facing curve lengths.
Yeah.
With this shorter, you're going to need a stiffer, or you're going to need a softer one, or a stiffer one. Where if it's longer, you're going to have a softer reed that'll work for you. So it's finding that balance point. And if you know how to work a reed, which I really don't, that might be able to help you some too.
Yeah, that would be a good video, is to have someone that really knows how to get those reed size. The only thing I really do is I'll take like a reed geek, and if it's too stiff, I'll work the edges down, and that'll soften them up a little bit.
So, look at it's 5:20.
Yeah.
I got to get to a gig, and I hope this is long enough video for you. But Scott,
it'll be
we're gonna have a lot of brain damage here if we try to play all these mouthpieces. I can tell you right now, there's a lot of these mouthpieces I would certainly love to try, and some of them I can just tell you by looking at them.
Yeah.
Don't even bother putting them in my face, because I wouldn't be able to play them. But again, thanks for having me over.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
That was
Someday
really fun.
we should get together and play some of these horns.
That could be cool too.
Yeah.
Let's
do it.
I'm here 24/7.
Yes.
Pretty much.
I know.
Yeah.
This is a nice horn, Scott.
Yeah.
Man, it's
It's funny on that horn. I kind of get them done to a certain point, and I let them rest, and then I'll go back and make more adjustments.
Yeah.
I've just gone to that horn one time, and then I haven't done anything else to it. It probably still has some leaks and issues, but it's killer.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
I told you, you gotta be careful of that one. You might like it.
Well, it's super nice.